Okay.
All right. Well, good morning. My name is Dincer. I am the director of the Institute for Corruption Studies. Today, our guest is Mr. Sergio Moro. Mr. Moro was one of the head judges in Lava Jato Operation Car Wash. Then he became the Minister of Justice and Public Security in Brazil. Today, he is a presidential candidate. He just came out with a big book on corruption in Brazil. I would like to thank him for accepting our invitation to be with us today. We are also very happy because we have Dr. Michael Johnston with us today. He is one of the handful of experts in the world today on issues related to corruption. He is also head of advisory board in Institute for Corruption Studies. We also have Dr. Mamede here. He is a network fellow in Institute for Corruption Studies, and thanks to him, we have Mr. Moro today with us. So I would like to start with asking Mr. Moro what he has been doing since Lava Jato.
Okay.
Tell us what he's been doing the last few years after Lava Jato, and then we can start talking about his book. After he talks about his book, about maybe 15, 20 minutes, we have some very, very tough questions to him. Again, thank you very much, Mr. Moro. The mic is...
Thank you very much, Professor Dincer. Thank you, Professor Johnston, Professor Mamede, for this invitation. It's a great pleasure and great honor to be here. Let me make some advertisement here, and then I'll finish. That's the book. Okay. It's written in Portuguese. Maybe we will have in the future an English version. It's a long story, Professor, if I start to talk about what I did after the car wash operation. I believe it's a kind of continuity about my work in the car wash. So I'll take just a minute to explain a little about the book, about the car wash operation. I decided to write this book just after I left the position of minister in Bolsonaro government. I resigned in April 20. I received some invitation for some publishers, and all those people were provoking me. You need to write about your experience. Then, well, I accept one of the invitation and start to write. I thought in the beginning that I would do that in 3 months, but unfortunately it took much more longer to write this book. It's about my experience as a federal judge in Brazil. I have a long career in the judiciary of about 22 years. I worked in several cases, special criminal cases, since 2002, working cases involving money laundering, drug trafficking. I even have some cases against drug lords in Brazil, not only Brazilian, but international ones. But the case of my life, the case that give more attention, that got more attention from the public, was the car wash operation, or as we call it in Brazil, Lava Jato operation, or as they call it in the rest of Latin America, Odebrecht case. Well, car wash is about a large investigation about a corruption scheme. I call this a system of corruption. It's not about one case of corruption isolated in time and space. It was about a real system where bribes were being paid as a kind of the rule of the game. I heard from some of the defendants, from some of the witnesses, that if you want to have a relationship with Petrobras. Petrobras is a Brazilian state-owned company which explore oil and gas. Is one of the major business company on this field. But if you want to have a relationship with Petrobras, if you want to have a contract, you need to pay bribes. And this happened for several years, more than 10 years in Brazil. Part of these bribes went to the directors and managers of Petrobras. That's what they call the house. But a share of the bribes went to politicians who were responsible for the nomination of these directors and managers in Petrobras. So it was a kind of patrimonialism. These public positions in Petrobras were being used to take bribes from the private sector to feed the enrichment of politicians and also to illegally financing political parties. Okay. In Brazil, we had a tradition of impunity for grand corruption, with some exceptions, but not that much. And the car wash case changed this environment. So for the first time, very powerful businessmen, very powerful politicians, including a Speaker of the House, other congressmen, a former president, start to be tried, convicted, and started to serve in prison terms. The operation started in 2014, and I worked on it until 2018. There are a lot of details about the case. One I believe is very important for the world is that during the investigation, it was also discovered that some foreign companies also paid bribes for Brazilian public officials at Petrobras. We considered officials of a state-owned company as public officials, okay? So the case started to have some consequences outside of Brazil. And it was also discovered that some of these Brazilian companies, which paid bribes for directors and managers at Petrobras, also paid bribes for public officials of other countries, especially in Latin America, but also in Africa. And they also used accounts abroad, especially in countries like Switzerland, Liechtenstein, Caribbean islands, to launder the money. So the case started to get international with a lot of consequences. The Switzerland authorities started to work with us in this case. The DOJ, US DOJ also. So in certain time, it became probably one of the largest corruption investigations in the world history. I was kidding. I was walking here after I left the government. I lived for a year in the United States. I was walking here at the streets of Washington, and suddenly this guy stopped me on the street and started to talk with me with a strange Portuguese. And he said, "Oh, I recognize you. You are." Then I helped the guy. I said, "I'm Sergio Moro." Okay. And then the guy said, "Wow, I'm a big fan of car wash. I lived in Angola, and the case had consequences in Angola. It seems that one of this Brazilian company also paid or bribes or make illegal electoral donations for the former president of Angola." And the guy I'm not sure as a consequence of that, but it helped to create the environment that obliged him to resign his office some years ago. So it was an international big case. Well, it was hard work. Of course, it was not only my work, it was institutional work, but maybe for the first time we start to see the fight against corruption in Brazil improving by the side of the punishment. Of course, we need also to work on prevention, but we also need the punishment. It's like the stick and carrot theory. Okay. In 2018, I received an invitation by the elected president, Bolsonaro, to join the government. And well, I saw this as a chance, as an opportunity to consolidate the efforts against corruption, not only in punishment, but also in prevention. Of course, as a Minister of Justice, I had a lot of other commitments. We have a big problem in Brazil with violent crime, with organized crime, and of course, we have issues related with human rights, with consumer rights. But the main point was to go to the government to consolidate these efforts against corruption. I accepted. At that time, if we turn our clocks to 2018, the elected president was a kind of controversial person, but a lot of people believe that he would, after being elected, he would take a position of a statesman and, well, delegate part of the work to, they use the word in Brazil, super ministers. That was me in the Ministry of Justice and Paulo Guedes at the Ministry of Economy. Okay, I accepted. I went to the government with this purpose. I believe I did a good job. Of course, it's hard to make this self-evaluation. Okay, people need to judge by themselves. We get improving in the fight against organized crime, in reducing violent crime in Brazil, but the main purpose to consolidate the efforts against corruption, I was not able to go far, especially because these policies suffered resistance from the Congress, also from part of our Supreme Court. This is kind of normal because in a country with problems with corruption, with a tradition of impunity, it's you could expect that you will face resistance from Congress, from other politician actors. This is normal. The main problem is that in time I start to realize that I didn't have the support from the president, and at the opposite, he started to sabotage my my projects. Well, anyway, I was in that position, and I need to try to fulfill my plans, to enforce what I was planning. I believe I make some advances, but in April 2020, the president decides to interfere in the federal police, changing the director of the federal police. The president was not able to state it publicly, the reasons for this change. I was strongly in opposition of this change. And when he decided to change without my agreement, I decided to left the government. The president himself said later in public that he wanted to fire me, to dismiss me earlier because I didn't protect him and his family against investigation by the this is strange to say, but he said this in public, so I could repeat what he said. From the federal police, from the Brazilian IRS, and even from from reports from our financial unit intelligence, our COF, that's the equivalent of United States FinCEN. So unfortunately, I need to leave the government. I need to resign. I did not accept the position to protect the president from regular investigation. I accept that for completely different reason. And I need to be real with my commitments in what I believe. Then I stayed out of, I stayed in a kind of a quarantine time, a legal quarantine time, after I left my position as minister. Then I started to work in a consulting company, a United States consulting company, Alvarez Marçal, not in a position as a lawyer, but as a consultant, working in fields like internal corporate investigation, anti-bribery compliance, and anti-bribery due diligence, because in certain way, of course, I need to earn my life. I did not become rich as a judge or as a minister. I need to earn my life. But in certain way, I saw this as a possibility of continuing to do something that I believe, but now at the private sector. I really believe that the private sector could play a major role in the fight against corruption. It's, of course, it's the government needs to create and enforce strong policies against corruption, but also the private sector has its own responsibility, and it could, in certain way, go on without, even without the support of the government. After a year working in the private sector, looking what was happening in Brazil nowadays, especially foreseeing a difficult election in 2022 for Brazil, I decided to accept an invitation from a political party in Brazil, Podemos. It's a political party at the center of the political spectrum. It's not. It's completely different from Podemos of Spain. Okay, I decided to affiliate, and now I'm starting another project, as you said. So this is a short resume about what happened in the last years and about the what you could find in my book. The fight against corruption in Brazil, in certain way in the world, because Brazil is not different what happened in other parts of the world about this kind of issue. The efforts to consolidate the fight against corruption, but the resistance from the corruption system against it. So I believe you could find a lot of thoughts about a lot of lessons, an interesting experience about Brazil efforts against corruption and how it's difficult to deal with this subject. I usually make a comparison and going to the end, uh, looking what happened in the United States in certain way. You have the Watergate scandal, then you approve the Foreign Corrupt Practice Act. You have that major corporation scandals like Enron, WorldCom in uh, the last decade of the last century. But then you approve the SOX law, and then you have 2018, that financial crisis, and you approved Dodd-Frank Act. I believe, of course, we know every country has problems. United States also have problems, but believe this is the right reaction when you have corporation scandals or corruption scandals. You need to move on and approve a new law to face these challenges. Unfortunately, what we saw in Brazil after car wash Lava Jato was a kind of reaction from the system against the fight against corruption. So this is a little bit sad, but anyway, that's something that we need to change again, and the only way to do that is through democracy. That's it, a short resume. Sorry for I probably spoke more than 10 minutes or 15 minutes, but I'm all available for the questions.
Thank you very much. And Michael has some very interesting questions. So I'm going to leave the mic to Michael now.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Moro, for a really enlightening account of what must have been a very difficult 2 or 3 year interval, and actually going further back than that in your life and in the life of Brazil. I think the Brazilian example is so important for a variety of reasons. I mean, one is that the social, economic, political stakes of corruption and of acting against it are so large in the case of Brazil. And as as Brazil goes, many other countries will follow. So we watch this case very carefully, and of course wish you every conceivable success. My first question, I guess, has to do with moving from the roles you have occupied to the role of a presidential candidate. Having spent time in the Bolsonaro government, I can imagine from the standpoint of fighting corruption must have been time very well spent and very valuable experience. But what will it take to persuade the voters that because of the affiliation with that government, that your candidacy is something new, is something different, that Podemos will offer a genuine alternative to the status quo?
Oh, Professor Johnston, I'm very different from Bolsonaro and even from the other candidate, Lula, at least the two biggest opponents on these elections. I believe that my position during the government was very different from Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro, some people qualify him as a kind of far-right president. I never endorse some of his thoughts on some policies, like policies related with guns, like policies related with the environment. Okay. When I was at the government, I worked to I can say this, to in my project, in my plans, and the plans were about improving the rule of law. This is completely something completely different than Bolsonaro perspective about what uh, a government should make, or what a country should be committed with. So the fight against corruption, in my opinion, is also more about the fight in favor of the rule of law. It's not about punishment. It's not about vengeance. Of course, the fight against corruption improve the economy efficiency, the government efficiency, but the main point is to make the rule of law is stronger in a country. This is closely related to democracy. I'm not sure. I didn't have this perception, at least in 2018. And you know, he was the president elected by more than 50 millions of Brazilians. There was some hope that he would behave differently in the government. And I also heard from some friends there and other people, even one of the justice of the Supreme Court spoke in public that he understand that if I was going to the government, this would be a good thing, because I would act like a rule of law protector with a president not so committed with this kind of principle. So I'm completely different from Bolsonaro. And when I resigned the government, it was a hard time. I suffered a lot of attacks from him and from his supporters. That's strange in Brazil, because the left said that I'm a CIA agent. Bolsonaro supporters said that I'm a communist. Then I joke that I'm a CIA agent who is also a communist or something like that. So there's a lot of lies. But I believe with my behavior resigning at 2 years ago in 2020, April of 2020, in a situation that that was difficult to make that decision, but I believe I did the right thing. So this make a clear separation between me and President Bolsonaro.
Just to follow up on that, I have no doubt that anyone who looks at excuse me, looks at the record in detail will see things as you have laid them out for us. And I think that the differences will be apparent. But 2 years have elapsed, and voters, at least in this country, are notoriously uninformed about details and such. They form a quick impression, and it's very difficult to change. What will it take to bring those points home to the voters as a political candidate?
Well, we are just starting. We are in a pre-campaign time. The point is all about, I believe, telling the truth to the Brazilian people, what happened. There are a lot of questions about that. I wrote the book, not because the elections, it was a separate project. I was invited to write it. I decided to write it even before thinking about going as an electoral candidate. So the book also will help, at least to influencers here in Brazil. But for the rest of the people who need to hear the story again with details, I don't have anything to hide. And it's strange, because sometimes even the president spoke the truth. Not all the time, but sometimes he spoke the truth about what happened. He gave a statement. Professor Mamede could confirm here last week, saying in public that he, as I said, he wanted to dismiss me earlier, but he was afraid of my popularity. And the main problem was that I was not protecting him against investigations. So this is very strange.
Professor Dincer? Sure.
Michael, do you have another question, or should I continue with my questions?
Well, I could, I guess, follow up too by suggesting, as recent commentaries have, that one of the upshots of the Bolsonaro era is that key institutions in the judiciary and the legislative and the investigative arms and such of the Brazilian government, institutions important to fighting corruption, have been weakened in the Bolsonaro years, and in some cases that's political, some cases been done by policy change, or just simply through an unwillingness to enforce rules and laws that are already on the books. Is that an accurate perception of the situation? And if so, what would be the priorities to follow in terms of which institutions to bolster and repair?
I believe this is an accurate statement. Let me just say that, for example, against the fight against corruption, it was not only Bolsonaro who played to undermine these efforts. He found a lot of allies in other branches of the government, because there was always resistance against the end of grand corruption impunity. Okay, we thought in the elections that the elections in 2018 would provide a leader, at least, who could, as a president, face these challenges and consolidate these efforts. Unfortunately, this didn't happen, but these attacks against institutions, against the rule of law, they came from the president, but also from other political agents. I believe this is important to be fair with the president. I'm not putting him in a good position, but I'm saying that there are others who we could also blame. But your statement is accurate. Maybe it started with some attacks against scientific institutions. We have a problem in Brazil nowadays with the deforestation of the rainforest of Amazon. And I will, even in 2019, the president started attacking an institution in Brazil called INPE, which is responsible to supervise the numbers of the increase or the decrease of the deforestation in Brazil. And when some bad data for Brazil appeared, he started to attack the president of that institution. Maybe that was the starting point of the attack against independent institution, in this case, a scientific one. This also happened in other scenarios. During the pandemic, he made attacks against Anvisa, which is our agents in charge of healthy issues, healthy policies, because he was the president denied the gravity of the pandemic, and he undermined the policies that some governors were adopting to prevent the spread of the coronavirus, like social distance policies. So in certain way, I believe the attacks against the rule of law and the attacks against the Brazilian efforts against corruption was part of a broad picture in certain way. Okay, this is really sad. But by the other side, I believe Brazilian institutions resisted against these efforts, at least in part. We suffer. Some of the policies were undermined because of the president efforts. But for example, the state governments still adopted social distance policies. The Anvisa was not compromised. Not in every field it was possible to resist, but still Brazilian institutions are strong, and will survive despite of being put in a test.
Thank you very much. I have one other different kind of question. I'll defer until later and give others the time to jump in. But I find your remarks extremely interesting, and at least as I interpret them, rather hopeful. So in that, I wish you great success.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I have a couple of questions, Mr. Moro, if you will. You mentioned the role of the private sector in the fight against corruption. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Well, there is this nowadays this movement in the corporation sector about the ESG goals, environmental, social, and governance. This is very strong nowadays in the fields about sustainability, diversity, but also at the core of governance, we have anti-bribery policies. We have now a trend in favor of international extraterritorial jurisdiction against corruptions. So, for example, during the car wash case, some of Brazilian companies suffered, were prosecuted by foreign authorities like the DOJ based on the FCPA or the SEC. So sometimes, even with these attacks against the force against corruption in Brazil, the corporate world has a more global view about the importance of compliance and of anti-bribery policies. Let me give you an example. There is some research about in Brazilian companies about the number of them which had compliance policies before and after car wash operation. In research involving about 250 relevant Brazilian companies, the numbers were 54% in 2015, and the numbers went to no, 87 percentage of them in 2018. So the corporate world is moving, it reacting better, at least in Brazil, than the public sector, than the government in this fight against corruption. And I believe in certain way you cannot make generic statements about that, but all around the world we are looking, at least the big companies understanding that you could face challenges from extraterritorial jurisdiction if you uh, don't comply with anti-bribery laws. We are also watching, seeing laws being approved in Brazil, like the Clean Companies Act before the Lava Jato, 2013. Before that, we have the FCPA. We saw also, we had also the UK Bribery Act. Some countries in Latin America also approved similar laws during the car wash case. That's the case of Peru, Mexico, even Argentina. So it's, I believe, despite of these setbacks in Brazil and in certain countries, there is a kind of international trend in favor of anti-corruption. And this is affecting more quickly the private sector than the public sector.
So following up on that, I'm assuming Petrobras was not an isolated case. I think, major publicly owned institutions we have, at least in other parts of the world, following the news stories, this is not an isolated case. And also based on your comments on how the behavior of the corporate world is changing, do you see privatizing these major public companies as a policy option in the fight against corruption?
Yes, could be an option. That's interesting because Petrobras, we believe that Petrobras in Brazil, before the car wash operation, was the most prepared company, most prepared company than the others ones. It was a company which had the better governance between all other state-owned companies in Brazil. But even so, we saw these major political criminal scandals in it. And probably it happens in other state-owned companies. We have specific proof about Eletronuclear, another public company in Brazil, Eletrobras, electric company, state-owned company in Brazil. Privatization could maybe help to reduce the corruption in these markets. Of course, you need to study the best model to make this privatization, because you also have corruption in the private sector, and you don't want to change a kind of public monopoly for a private monopoly. So you need to be careful. But
there's also corruption during the privatization.
Yes, of course.
Not we saw in Russia, right? So
yes. Anyway, if you could make the privatization, but also guarantee competition in the market, probably you will be able to reduce corruption, because as we know, corruption undermine efficiency, economic efficiency. So in a competitive world, if you are highly corrupted, you could not survive.
My second question is kind of unrelated to what we were talking about. Me and Michael, we were interested in corruption in general, but we're also interested in corruption in specific branches of government and the relationship between these specific branches and how corruption spills over from one branch to another. And we have a huge argument here on the election of judges in the United States, elected versus appointed. As far as I know, in Brazil, you have the judges are appointed, they're not elected. And how do you see corruption in the judicial sector in judicial system in Brazil? And what are your thoughts on appointment of the judges, appointing judges versus electing the judges, the election system of the judges in general?
Oh, that's a very hard question. I believe in general, okay, I would say that in Brazil, the judiciary is the least corrupted branch. But we have cases of corruption there. Corruption that could involve bribes, but also sometimes corruption that could involve a game of power. Okay. Unfortunately, we saw, I'm not saying this is corruption, but part of the setbacks that the fight against corruption suffered came from our Supreme Court. Our Supreme Court delivered a very important decision in 2016, allowing that after a decision by an appeal court, you could enforce a criminal conviction. You didn't need to wait the final decision. This was very important in Brazil because we have a very overloaded judicial system. So usually sometimes complex cases in Brazil endure forever in the judicial docket. So it's important to, if you have the possibility to enforce a criminal conviction after the decision of the appeal court, it's fundamental in Brazil. Each country has its system. I know that in the United States, you start to enforce even after the first decision by a district court, for example. You don't need to wait for the decision of appeal. But in Brazil, in the past, you need to wait for the final decision by a superior court in Brasilia, and this took a decade in complex case, undermining completely any kind of efficient in the judiciary. So the Supreme Court made this decision in 2016. It did in part influenced by the car wash case, okay? But in 2019, November, the Supreme Court changed the previous rule and made another decision it was a split decision, 6-5, returning to the previous understanding that you need to wait for a final decision. And then a lot of several criminals who were convicted and were serving prison terms because of the rule established in 2016 were released. Even people who were defendants who have been convicted for corruption. That was the case of the former President Lula. He had been convicted He was serving prison term, and then the Supreme Court, the same Supreme Court that allowed his the enforce of his prison term in March of 2018, released him in November of 2019. If it was only the former President Lula, it would be bad, but not that bad. But they changed the rule. Well, this undermine a lot the force in Brazil against corruption. Of course, I respect a lot our Supreme Court, but it was a very bad decision. About elections of judges, I'm not an expert to give a sound opinion on this. Usually,
You
I think
say
that
you're not in favor of electing the judges in Brazil.
no, I would not. No, no, no. I'm not in favor of that. I'm not sure if it would be a good medicine. Probably not.
Mhm.
I don't think so. Our system has a lot of not so good aspects. There are a lot of failures. Sometimes the judiciary in Brazil, it seems to be very powerful, but inefficient, and it is not responsive for the demands of Brazilian people. So sometimes it's a kind. It seems like it's working for itself. Okay,
Yeah.
not giving good results. Elections, I'm not sure if it will be the right answer.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Now, I know Samuel has some questions, and I also know you don't have a lot of time. So what I will do, I will let Samuel ask one question, and then I would like to complete our interview with Michael's question. All right, go ahead.
Okay. Just one question, Professor. Professor Moro, considering your experience, have you already separated what will be your flags of defense in your political journey? Did you separate your flags that you starting to show off the Brazilian citizens about it's flags that I defend in my next chapters of this process?
Professor Mamede, the main concern in Brazil now is more about the economy than the fight against corruption. Of course, in certain level, corruption undermine economic efficiency, but people want to hear more about solutions for the economy. We are in a recession now in Brazil, high rates of unemployment, high interest rates. So we need to improve that. People need to answer solutions and propositions for that. Anyway, it's part of my life, the fight against corruption. So this is also an important flag. And I strongly believe that our incapacity to approve some necessary reforms to make our government more efficient, to make our economy more open, is certain way related with corruption, not specifically about bribes, but about the kind of state capture. The state is working not for the common good, but for special interests. So these things are related. One idea that we were thinking about, talking specifically about corruption, of course, we need to reinstate the enforcement of the criminal conviction after a decision of the appeal court. This is essential, of course. we also need to abolish that stand privilege that we call in Brazil foro privilegiado. It's something against of the idea of equality in a republic, and it in certain way it shields high politician against real accountability. Okay, and we were thinking about creating a national court against grand corruption. Okay, not creating a new bureaucracy, but using the judges of the judicial system by with due diligence and by a selective process to create a new national court that would have the would be in charge of judging cases about grand corruption. I read a lot about an experience that they made in Ukraine with the support of international organizations like the World Bank, creating. They made they concluded that the regular judicial system was not working in cases about grand corruption, so they decided to make something new. Maybe this could be a good idea also for Brazil. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you, Professor. Professor Oz.
Yes, we will end our interview with Mr. Moro with Michael's question.
Thank you very much. Part of what I wanted to ask has been touched upon already. The international dimension strikes me as being so very important in our consideration of all of this. That corruption, it's a cliche, but it's true, knows no boundaries, and no country can go it alone in dealing with many of the more dramatic forms. So my question really comes in two parts, and that is there are a number of seemingly positive things happening in the international dimension, growing concern about beneficial ownership of assets, for example, and money laundering and the like. The United States has been becoming much more active in the international arena, though I think I would say not always in a constructive or a cooperative fashion. Really, the two parts of the question are this: what would be the most important support and cooperation Brazil could get from the international arena? And secondly, have we got any hope of keeping up with the, call it the shadow economy, what we see in the Pentagon Papers, the Paradise Papers, and a variety of others, the economy that seemingly exists everywhere but is not regulated anywhere? Are we going to be fighting a losing battle on that level for the foreseeable future? A very small question there.
Oh, as I said, I believe there is this international trend against corruption. The corporate world is reacting quickly. Of course, you cannot make generic statements. Depends on the company, depends on the country. But I believe that we have more reason to have hopes for more integrity in the world than in the past. And we could see that we are improving the environment against corruption since 30 years ago. In the past, it was allowed, for example, that in some countries, companies could reduce their taxes using the bribes that the cost with the bribes that they paid in international transactions. So things are changing. not as fast as we want, but I believe that now there is this clear international trend. Of course, things could change, but it depends specifically on the academic world, the business world, the political world, to state the importance of the fight against corruption worldwide. And this international trend could also help national politicians or to enforce, to approve new laws, to really enforce the laws, the existing laws against corruption before the courts of justice. There is some discussion about the creation of international court against corruption, like the International Court in Rome against violations of human rights. I'm not sure if this is possible in the near future, but having this idea, it's also is part of this trend. Maybe we are seeing something changing. Human rights, for example, became an important issue in foreign policies in maybe the last 50 years, and it's still growing. Now there are a lot of discussion about the climate change. Maybe in the future we could have a similar discussion about corruption, at least in for the business world, in international commercial transactions. There are already a lot of mechanisms that could prevent and also punish who try to let's say to violate the law on that field. Of course, this is not perfect, but there is something now playing on this matter. And about the other question, the about well, the shadow government, I believe you're saying.
The shadow economy, in a sense.
Shadow
that,
economy,
the
yeah.
actors and transactions and flows of capital that are not regulated and not measured, not disclosed.
Okay. Well, this is also another challenge, because if you have something in the shadows, it's very difficult to control and understand what's going on. During my time as Minister of Justice, I participate in several meetings on international level with people, and then one of the concern was that in certain fields we were the law enforcement personnel were going dark to the dark, so you are not able anymore, for example, to wiretap some communications. This in certain way is good to protect privacy, but sometimes you need this kind of tools against criminals, and these undermine the efforts of the law enforcement agents. This is all about technology, and we still have a lot of informal economy in Brazil. This is a rule. Well, we need also to improve our regulations about this area and keep an eye on the recent developments on that. Now, there are a lot of concerns about, for example, cryptocurrency. We are not sure if this will be the normal way to do business in the future, or this is just an exception now. Anyway, we need to start to worry about proper regulation on that matter.
Well, I think we are right on time. So again, I would like to thank Mr. Moro, for accepting our offer to talk to us today. I would like to thank Michael and Samuel for their great questions. And well, I wish you good luck, Mr. Moro, in your journey to the presidency. And I hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your kindness to invite me here to this panel. It was very interesting, and it's always good to discuss these questions in an international field also.
Thank you.
Obrigado.